This is the Project Bumblebee rocket. The idea of this is that when it's sitting on the ground, these long struts with fins on them are folded out like this. When it launches, they fold back, which moves the fins to the bottom, which keeps it nice and stable. When it gets to apogee, where there's not a lot of air holding these down, little rubber bands at the top are able to pull out the fins, and now the center of pressure shifts way forward to the front here. And with the center of pressure at the front, it returns tail first. And because these are angled, it spins, which generates lift, which makes a nice slow descent and a soft landing. I've tested this concept with some other rockets in the past, and it's worked. I've also tested helicopter recovery on some rockets. This rocket has also flown, and it kind of worked, but as you can see, it had a bit of a hard landing, which means it broke one of the fins. Today, we're going to be fixing it, repairing it, and doing some upgrades. We're going to put bolts through these mounts to bolt the fins on. Right now, they're just held on with super glue. So we're going to upgrade that. That should be a lot stronger. We're also going to replace this central spliced section with one that has 3 bottles instead of just 2, which should give us more altitude. That was the main reason that it failed, is it didn't get enough altitude to start spinning up to speed the first time. You kind of need some tail weight to get the center of mass where it needs to be. We're going to start disassembling it here to do the upgrades. Start with removing this real quick. Put it off to the side here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is remove the rubber bands. This top part just screws on with these 3 screws, and there's channels you'll see in just a minute that the rubber bands go around. So with this top plate removed, you can see how the rubber bands loop around this center post. And then the top plate holds them in place. With that top plate removed, they can all come off, and then the pivots are just these barbecue skewers that we can just take off and remove the pivots. Now that the rubber bands are removed, I'm going to go drill the holes, get a couple other parts, and then I'll come back and we will finish reassembling this with the bolts. It'll really clamp these on in a much stronger way than just the super glue. I've gone ahead and drilled out the holes for the bolts. We've got our bolts selected out here, the tools. I also have a piece of construction paper to protect my desk from the super glue, because we are going to super glue these parts back together. So how this is going to work is we're going to take these 3D printed wedges that I made, we're going to put a bolt through, and then that bolt is going to go through the bottom here. The wedge will act as a bit of a washer, as well as making it so the bolt is flat. And then we'll put this nut on the back. That'll make it a lot stronger. We actually are going to super glue this wedge in place, as well as bolting it on. So I'm going to get started with that. Okay, so we've gotten the first 2 done. But now we have to do this third one, and this one was the one that was already broken. So as you can see, they so separated. So we actually need to put more super glue on, because we need to super glue both the little wedge and this, just to keep things nicely aligned. If we just had the bolt, there'd be a pretty high risk of these pivoting on the bolt. This is just corrugated plastic, and it's not that stiff. It could crush pretty easily. The super glue will hold everything kind of aligned, and the bolts will take a lot of the load, so we don't keep snapping these off. In my past rockets that use kind of a similar design, we've had a lot of problems with fins breaking off. Okay, so we're gonna let this glue dry, and then I will finish reassembling the rotor hub. We've now had time for all of the super glue to set, and the fins are now nicely bolted on. The next big thing is a big failure with the first flight was I don't think these fins were providing enough stability. It was fine on the way up, but I don't think they stabilized the rocket enough on the way down. So, we have these fin extensions, and you can see they stick up a lot, so when the fin folds out, it sticks above the top of the rocket a lot more, which helps it have a better of a stability margin on the way down, which should hopefully help us keep the correct orientation. So I'm going to get started installing those. Each fin and extension is labeled with a letter so I can match them up. And I'm going to get started with that. The bolts just push through the fin and the extension, and then we put a nut on the back. You'll notice I only tighten them to be about hand tight. The holes are tight enough that the tightness of the screw doesn't really need to hold anything together. The nuts just really need to hold the bolts and keep them from falling out. The next step, now that we have all of our upgrades done on the fin struts, is to start reintegrating. Another upgrade we're going to do is some hopefully stronger rubber bands. I'm going to try to double up these black ones. Okay, so looking at these and how everything fits, I'm just going to go with one rubber band. Two is going to be too much. Each fin will have one rubber band to pull it out. With our rubber bands in place, the next step is going to be fitting the fin pivots to the main rotor hub. Now we have all the fins fitted, we're going to try to get the rubber bands in here. Okay, because this was really difficult last time and these rubber bands are shorter, I'm actually not going to loop them over the central post and only loop them over each individual channel. See, they're just holding themselves. We can just slide the cover plate on and drop screws into each hole. You can see these fin extensions stick up past the top a lot further than the regular fins do. We have this new pressure chamber. You can see it has an extra segment on it relative to the old one. This is a 3-bottle splice, and the old one was only 2. So this should help give us some more altitude. So let's install this pressure chamber. With it flipped over, you can see it just screws into the middle here. It's just a normal bottle thread. And then we have this O-ring that seals the top of the pressure chamber. In the last part, we have this nozzle. This locks into the release mechanism, which holds it down while we're pressurizing and then can easily release once we're ready to launch. So let's install that. So you can see the fins are not as far back as you might like them. However, our center of mass is pretty far forward, and we have some really big fins on this. So hopefully that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And also see with the fins folded out, it does move our center of mass pretty far forward. I might have to add some tail weight to this in order to get it to descend properly. But I think that's going to wrap up the build here. This thing's pretty much ready to fly, so I'm going to head out pretty soon and launch it. The flights went pretty well. The first flight, we had a slight failure on the release head, so it released a little early, but we still got enough altitude to get a good test in. And it told us that we needed some tail weight. It was quite unstable on the way down, so we added this sock as some tail weight. On the first flight, we also damaged this fin, which required us to duct tape it back on. On flight 2, we flew at our target pressure of 100 psi, and it still came down in a pretty floppy way. Even with the ballast, it didn't work very well. The big thing that made a difference was that we beefed up the rubber bands a bunch. You can see we added a bunch more rubber bands to make the pulling force a lot stronger. We figured out what was happening was the rubber bands were pretty weak, and because the rubber bands were really weak, 2 fins would come out, the airstream coming from the side would hold the 3rd fin flat, meaning it couldn't get stable on the way down. On the 3rd flight we were nice and stable on the way down. These have a lot of area on the side, which prevented it from getting spun up to speed, which means it just kind of fell instead of spinning up and creating a bunch of lift. My idea for the future is we will replace these fins with a pair of grid fins on each fin. We'll have one grid fin at the top, laying like this, flat, which will provide stability on the way down, and then we'll have another grid fin at the bottom like this, which will provide stability on the way up. That way they provide stability where we need it, but don't create a bunch of drag as it's trying to spin up. We're also going to design these to use this size pressure chamber from the outset, because a longer pressure chamber means the center of mass has more area it can be in. We're going to redesign the rotor head to use stronger rubber bands, because that really helped a lot. I've got other projects I'm going to work on though, so that won't be for a little while. Anyways, that's all. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.